Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a virtual tour of Egypt. We're going to be exploring the locations of the Gospels. Sorry, I just realised the camera's cut off the S of Gospels there. And we're going to be, just looking at some of the sites and places that many of the stories that some of you, I imagine, will know very well from the Gospels actually took place. So, I hope that this will be a useful and beneficial time for you. Just a bit of a couple of little heads up things. So firstly, I hope everything will go smoothly. I've got 5. I've got 7 windows open on my computer at the moment, with all sorts of different things and presentation information and notes and the flight and the broadcast and YouTube and stuff like that. So, please do bear with me. I hope I can juggle everything okay. Hopefully there won't be any issues. Secondly, there's going to be plane noise going on from the flight. It'll be just the low drum of a propeller. If you get annoyed by it, though, just tell me and I will turn it off. If enough people in the chat are bored of it, to turn it off. But it's just a low drum of a small propeller plane, which is the one we're going to be going round in. So this tour has been created in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Microsoft recently released this simulation which has the entire world in it, which is pretty crazy. You can spin the globe and literally go in anywhere. So as soon as I tried it, my first sort of place was to Israel, just because I've never been. My parents have been and other people I know have been, but I've never had the chance to go. So I wanted to just see what these places were like. And when I was flying over it, I was like, wow, this is actually looks quite good. Maybe we could turn this into a sort of tour. So here we are, and many thanks to my dear mum who helped collate some of the notes and various facts for today's session. So obviously it's Christmas time, and if you're in the UK, particularly in the southeast, for many people Christmas has been cancelled. But for believers, we know Christmas will never be cancelled, because what is Christmas? It is when the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. And I think what's wonderful is that in today's tour, we're going to look at actually the places that the Word was, the place where his mother was told by the angel, you are going to give birth, and the Holy Spirit will come upon you, and you'll be with child, and his name shall be called Jesus. We're going to go to see where he did miracles and where he did various things. We're going to see where he prayed, where he was crucified, where he was born in Bethlehem. And so I think that tonight I'm hoping that while conventional Christmas in many ways in parts of the world, particularly in parts of the UK, has been really stripped back, we need to remember that at this time, it's not about us. Even though it's sad not being able to meet with family like we would have done, Christmas is about the Word becoming flesh and making his dwelling among us. And I hope that today, as we look through these various sites, you have a bit of hopefully a stronger appreciation of when you read different place names or events in the Gospels. You'll think, okay, right, so I can roughly know where that was in relationship to other places and sort of what that would have looked like. Here's a really handy map of some of the sites that Jesus ministered to and took place. And I know it'll be very hard to see, so I'll just zoom in. We're going to I'll show you our route in a second, but we're going to be starting with Nazareth, which was, of course, his hometown. We're going to be going up to the Sea of Galilee. And as you see, Sea of Galilee has all sorts of things that happened around it, the whole region of Galilee. Then we're going to be flying down the Jordan River to Jericho, down here, then to Bethlehem, and finally finishing with Jerusalem and the Mount of Olives, which, as you know, is the garden he prayed in the night before he was going to be crucified. So just showing you on Google Maps what our route's going to be. We're starting off in Nazareth, as I say. We're going to go up around the Sea of Galilee, down south, following the Jordan to Jericho, then down. And I wanted to go this slightly strange route into Jerusalem because there's one or two things just south, just before Bethlehem, which I wanted to show you as well. So I hope that this will be useful for you. So I'm going to start the flight now, and I'll be obviously talking as we go, and hopefully this will be useful for you. So here we go. I'll just get it all going. Okay. So here we are. We are flying directly towards Nazareth at the moment. Now, Nazareth, of course, for many people, could be considered the start of the Christmas story. Now, really, I know that's up for debate. The Christmas story, I think, starts in Genesis chapter 3, where God tells the serpent that somebody will come from the woman who will crush Satan's head. But in Nazareth, and Nazareth is sort of, if you just look directly in front of the plane, this built-up area, we're going to be flying up to it now, was where, of course, in Luke chapter 1, we see God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph. Of course, her name was Mary. In Nazareth, we see that, and I'll just show you a picture of what it looks like. Obviously, you're seeing it from the air right now, but I'll just show you what it looks like here. Right now, it is the largest Arabic city in the country, but you'll find in Nazareth here and a lot of other sites that there are churches built in specific areas to commemorate certain parts of the life of Jesus. So, for example, in Nazareth there is the Basilica of the Annunciation, which is a Catholic church, of course, and again, many of them that we see actually are Catholic churches, and of course that is a church built to commemorate the Annunciation of the birth of Jesus. So yeah, Nazareth, as you see right now, it doesn't look much like a town, does it? Back then, it was actually a lot different. It was a very, very small town surrounded by hills. It wasn't very accessible. You see actually right now, it's on a bit of a hill plain. You know, on the right-hand side, we see that there's sort of fields and other things down. So to go to Nazareth, you had to want to go there. It wasn't something you would sort of pass through on the way to going somewhere else. You would go to Nazareth if you wanted to go there specifically. Now, of course, like I say, it was such a small town that I'm sure you remember the reaction from Nathanael in John chapter 1 verse 4 when he says, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" When he's told about Jesus, this guy from Nazareth, he's like, "Nazareth? Can anything good come from Nazareth?" But actually what happened in the 1800s, in 1850, the Europeans, as you can imagine, descended on it, turned the town into a holy site, and it just exploded outwards. Okay, so now if you look at it, it has turned into the sort of the city, the Arab-Israeli city that we see today. But Nazareth in Jesus' time would have been much, much smaller. And Sarah, yes, the video will be staying up, so you can share the link with anyone at any time. So we're going past Nazareth now, and in front of us you see, directly ahead of the plane, is a little mountain. It looks quite strange, doesn't it? Because it's coming right out of generally quite flat terrain. Now, this mountain is called Mount Tabor or Tabor. Forgive my pronunciation, anybody that's good at speaking Hebrew, because I'm not so good at it. But I just want to show you, this is a photo of it, and on the top there is the church. Actually, I'll hide myself so you can see the Church of the Transfiguration. Now, why is that up there? Because this is where, and we don't know for sure, but this is where much of Christian tradition and history tells us that Jesus went up when he was transfigured. You remember he took his inner circle of disciples with him, Peter, James and John, and he was transfigured. And you remember Peter made the comment, you know, Moses and Elijah appeared with him, they're all shining, and Peter was like, "Shall we make some little booths, tents for you?" So yeah, this is reportedly where it took place, and you see it's quite an imposing mountain. There aren't many other candidates for mountains that could sort of fit the bill, so that's why many people think it took here. And so see those buildings on the left now, just as we go past it, that is where there are two churches built on top of Mount Tabor. There's I think it's a Greek Orthodox church on the northeast side, and there's a Roman Catholic church, the one I showed you, the Church of the Transfiguration, on the southeast side. As you can imagine, it's quite a key area. So now what we're doing, we are flying, and I'll just show you the map again. Here we go. So we're flying sort of from Nazareth on the way to Galilee. So we're entering the region of Galilee right now. Now, Galilee factors quite significantly in the life of Jesus. Looking at this little picture here, you see this is just around Galilee, you know, surrounding regions around the Sea of Galilee. There is so much stuff that went on. It was a region that was figured very prominently in the life of Jesus. Now, the word Galilee, which actually means province, is named 67 times in the Bible, 9 times in the Old, 67 in the New. Sorry, that math doesn't work right, does it? It's 67 plus 9. Now, Jesus lived there for much of the first 30 years of his life, and his preaching tours would often be around the Sea of Galilee. And of course, some of the amazing miracles we see, walking on water, the catches of fish, all took place in the Sea of Galilee. And I think you can see it just now, straight up ahead. We are coming to it in a second. All but one of his disciples were Galileans. Also, it was around this area that he met the disciples after his death and resurrection, and it was in this region that he gave them the Great Commission. So for such a small area, it's had a huge impact on the world. Now, the Galileans themselves were considered to be quite a sort of rough and rugged people. They resisted the Roman rule even more stubbornly than the Judeans sort of down south did. And many people sort of regarded them as uneducated, uncultured and unruly, which is why I think it's amazing that Jesus chose most of his disciples from this region to change the world. And I think that's a wonderful sort of testament and reminder that God often uses the small, look down on things of this world for his own glory. And so we're coming up to the Sea of Galilee here. And this is a sea that is, again, figured a lot in popular culture. I'm just going to pause it there for a second just to show you sort of a real photo of it here. So here we see that, it's a very large sea, and this river that's coming out actually from the south end, which we're going to go around and see, is the River Jordan. And those that know their Bible will know the River Jordan is a very famous river, and many things happened in it, and we will be talking about some of those in a second. Now, the Sea of Galilee itself has several different names in the Bible. Chinnereth or Kinnereth in the Old Testament, and the Sea of Tiberias or Gennesaret in the New Testament. Now, interestingly, the name Kinnereth comes from the word Kinnor, and again, I'm so sorry if I'm pronouncing this wrong, which means harp, because if you look at the shape of the Sea of Galilee, and I'll just show you here, do you see it's sort of shaped a bit like a harp? Okay, so that's sort of where it gets its name from. But as I just said, it had lots and lots of different names. So let's continue with the flight. So we're approaching the Sea of Galilee here from the western side, and up the sort of the northwest corner of it, if you sort of look about 11 o'clock from the plane right now, you've got the town or village of Gennesaret. Again, we see Jesus doing various things there. It's around this area that he possibly fed the 5,000, where he certainly did heal the sick. But what I wanted to do first, before taking you around some of these towns, was to give you a little taster of what it would have been like to be in a storm. One of the good things about this simulator is you can adjust the weather settings. Now, part of the reason why I pre-recorded the flight and didn't fly live while trying to do the presentation is because first time I tried this, I crashed in the Sea of Galilee. I turned the storm on, I got too close, and the plane just ended up ditched in the water, and I didn't want to crash live in front of all of you, so that's why I pre-recorded the flight. So you see right now it's a beautiful sunny day. It'd be lovely to be out on the water fishing, but of course it wasn't always like that. This Sea of Galilee has, as you see, sort of mountains either side of it, and the way that they work, they would sort of channel the wind, and because of the temperature there could be very quick changes in the heat and the cold, and therefore you can imagine that the weather and the wind could change very quickly. So here we go. I'm just going to be adjusting the weather settings, and again, this isn't perfect, this simulation isn't perfect, but it gives you a little bit of an idea of what this feels like. So here we go. I've turned on the storms, so notice that visibility is dropped. There are some waves. Notice there are some sort of white caps down there at the bottom. The simulator isn't a water simulator, it's a flight simulator, so I couldn't quite get the waves up to the height I wanted them to. But you see that suddenly it's gone from being a lovely day out to being actually quite unnerving. Now, I also here try and make it darker, but it sort of works against me because it just goes pitch black. So you can imagine what it would have been like, the disciples in Mark 4 and Mark 6, being in pitch black with maybe only lightning. You see that the lightning's illuminating the water there. What it would have been like to be a boat in the middle of that, completely rocked and shaken, and then suddenly you see somebody walking on the water near you, and of course it's Jesus, and they are absolutely terrified. I would hate to be in a situation with this low visibility, with this wind and waves, and I struggled in a plane. Okay, so I don't know how these guys managed to cope in a boat. So yeah, this is just a little taster of what a storm on the Sea of Galilee would have looked like. I think it's another amazing thing that Jesus just spoke with a word. Be still, be silent. And the wind stopped and the waves stopped. Usually when a storm is brewing or a storm is in full throw and the wind stops, the waves still continue for some time. But when Jesus Christ speaks, nature obeys him. So I think our storm simulation is going to finish in a second. We're going to continue with our nice day flight up to the north of the Sea of Galilee. We're going to be looking at Capernaum right now. Here we go. Yeah, I'm just putting it to clear skies. And off we go again. So yeah, it would have been lovely to fishing on a day like this, not so much in the storms. So this Sea of Galilee is about 15 miles from north to south. So, think about any lakes that you've seen in your life. This is a very, very big lake, which is why, waves and stormy conditions could happen. I think all the lakes I've ever seen in my life, you couldn't have a storm if you wanted to because they're so small. But this is really quite a substantial piece of water. Now, we're turning sort of left here towards Gennesaret, and we're heading up towards Capernaum. Now, in my church, I've been preaching through, and those at Woolwich will know I've been preaching through the Gospel of Luke at the moment, and Capernaum so far has factored, a fair amount. We've seen some notable things happen in Capernaum, including a centurion being healed. So we're going to just come up to Capernaum now. So Capernaum is just slightly, if you look at sort of 1 o'clock of the plane right now, so look at in front of the plane and then go right a little bit, that is where Capernaum is. And then we can do a little orbit around Capernaum itself so you can see what it looks like. Now Capernaum is fascinating because the first time I flew over this a few months ago, when I first did this flight, I was just like, man, this place is so underwhelming. There's nothing there. And I didn't realise that it isn't actually a proper town anymore. It's actually just turned into an entirely archaeological site. So people don't live there anymore. It is an archaeological site, as you can imagine. It's very rich in history. So we're just coming up to it now, and when the plane begins to bank left, you'll see the area of Capernaum as we start orbiting around it. So Capernaum was a fishing village north of Galilee. It had a synagogue there, which was built by or funded by a Roman centurion. And for those in our church, when Jesus heals the centurion servant, this was him. So Capernaum right now, guys, is the left wing is touching it right now. Okay, so that's Capernaum right there. And I have to check the map here because, again, I'm not entirely... I was just like, man, it looks like nothing's there. But that is Capernaum, okay? So you see that we're looking down on it right now. So a lot of that is an archaeological dig site. And I'll just show you right now what it looks like in the flesh. So here's what Capernaum looks like. It is, an archaeologist's dream. There's lots and lots of stuff there. And what's fascinating is that reportedly they have identified possibly Peter's house. Now, how have they? Now they've blasted off so nobody can actually go into Peter's house. But how have they identified it? Well, there was some graffiti from early Christians found on the wall, which made people think, okay, this has got to be the house of Peter. Because we know Peter lived in Capernaum. He was a fisherman. It would have made sense to live on the shores of the river, and so Peter lives there. So Capernaum was a town that was used a lot by Jesus as a centre, if you like, of his ministry in Galilee after John was arrested. Actually, Mark chapter 2 verse 1 sort of describes it as his home, his area. And there's nowhere else, not even in Jerusalem, that is described as this way. He teaches in the synagogue here. So you see this is very small little buildings below. There's nothing really left of it. But this, you're looking at the exact spot where Jesus did so much in his ministry. I think it's just amazing. The wonders of modern technology, getting to see this stuff. Of course, he heals Simon Peter's mother-in-law here. And again, that's why Peter's house is in this area. And of course, the woman who touched his robe and was healed of the flow of blood that she had, and indeed the raising of Jairus' daughter. All of this happened in that little town down there, just above the plane right now. So again, it's wonderful to look down at these things. But what's fascinating, I think there's a little challenge for us here. In Matthew chapter 11:23, Jesus actually curses Capernaum, Bethsaida, and Chorazin because of their lack of faith in him. And this city was actually evacuated in about 7th century AD, and it has not really been repopulated since. And I think it's a warning, that we can listen to the words of Jesus, we can be attending church, we can be hearing, we can be seeing the wonders that he does, and yet if we reject him, he will not have patience forever. Everyone has a specific moment in which they will breathe their last, and so do not put the Lord Jesus off, my friends. So what we're doing now, we're flying down the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee, and I'm just going to boost the flight time up a little bit here. Now, what's coming up is that if you sort of look in front of the plane now, you see there's an area of the Sea of Galilee that's jutting out. Okay, and I should say, by the way, that the candidates for Sermon on the Mount are either immediately on the left, right here now, or some mountains which were just past Capernaum. Sorry, I should have highlighted them at the time. But those are the sort of two main candidates people say for the Sermon on the Mount. So coming up now on the left-hand side is a place which is called Gergesa now, and again it's possible that this is sort of a candidate, one of the two areas where Jesus cast out a demon from a guy that was living in a cemetery. If you remember that story, he'd crossed over the Sea of Galilee and had met this guy. So this is one of the areas that people think it could have happened, or there's an area further south people think it could have happened, but it would have been one of these. So yeah, flying around this Sea of Galilee, there is so much history in this area about areas that Jesus did things and areas that Jesus did, and I just found it amazing when I was looking at this, just seeing it in the flesh. I know that some of you have had the chance of actually going there and seeing it properly, but I also like the ability to look at it from the air, so you can say, hey, there's Capernaum, and there's various other areas like Bethesda and Gennesaret, etc. So what we're going to be doing now, we're going to be flying a little bit south. Okay, now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to show you the bottom of the map here. So this is the Sea of Galilee, and we're flying down sort of this red route here, and at the bottom, it's very, very hard to see on Google Maps, I'd have to probably zoom in more, but sort of next to where this road is, coming out the south of the Sea of Galilee, is the River Jordan. Now, of course, we all know the River Jordan is a very key thing in biblical accounts. And what's interesting is that when Jesus was baptized in Matthew 3:13, it says Jesus arrived at the Jordan from Galilee to be baptized. So actually, and if you just look to the right hand side of the plane, you see actually just directly in front, you see there's sort of that river winding through, glinting in the sunlight. If you imagine that Jesus traveled to the Jordan from Galilee, it probably would have been somewhere around here that he was baptized. Of course, we can't say exactly. Other people say that it was actually a little bit further down. We're not sure exactly, but it was obviously in this river, the River Jordan, that Jesus was baptized. So you see that the plane was sort of following the course of the Jordan a little bit. We'll go a bit higher in a second, but this gives you a little idea of what this river was like. Now, of course, this river was part of the in the Old Testament, the fortress, the protection of the people in the Promised Land when the people from the Israelites came from Egypt, and after wandering around in the wilderness for 40 years, they were finally allowed to go into the Promised Land. And the people of Jericho, we're going to Jericho. I'm just going to speed up the time a little bit because this is a bit of a long flight. Let me just show you the map again. When I did this, I'll just show you comparatively so you can see, and I will speed it up so it won't drag. But you see, so we've done Nazareth around the Sea of Galilee, and then it's a long flight down to Jericho. So I'm just going to speed it up a little bit more so we can get there without hopefully boring you guys too much. So yeah, Jordan was a key defence, and of course those in Jericho were sort of thinking, well, the children of Israel, firstly we were protected by our high walls, and we'll talk about those in a second, but also we're protected by the River Jordan. But of course the Lord God dried up the River Jordan when the priests with the Ark of the Covenant set foot on it. And now, just a little side thing here, guys, something that as I was flying down, it sort of made me think. When God made a promise to Abraham that his descendants would be like the stars in the sky, like the sand, it just when you actually consider how many grains of sand or how many stars in the sky that is, and yet, so I thought I'd just put it to night quickly, and I just was reflecting on that as I was flying down about how God has fulfilled that promise, and how we, and I don't think many watching are sort of native Jewish people, but how all of us are part of that great family, because what did God say to Abraham? That all nations of the earth will be blessed through you. And isn't it so true? We have been blessed through Abraham, because who came from Abraham? The Lord Jesus Christ. and we can share in his truth and in his life. What a wonderful thing that this is. And again, at this Christmas time where so much has been taken away from us, reflecting in the person of Christ, I think is a sure antidote to any despondency that we might be feeling. So I'm as you can see, I've sped up the flight time by about ×5, and we're slowly making our way down. But do you see the sheer variety of terrain that we have here in Israel? You know, on the left-hand side, you've got these sort of like dry, arid mountains. Right here, you've got around the River Jordan, of course, this sort of green zone. When I was in Afghanistan, it was, you know, very in the south. It was very dry and dusty. But around the Helmand River, it was just like this. It was like a thick, lush area where lots of farmland could grow and farmers could operate, because the water is life, of course, and the water will spread out and water these areas. So again, if you think about this land flowing with milk and honey, you know, this would have been a wonderfully fertile, attractive site to the Israelites. So as you can see, Israel isn't actually massively big. It's from sort of the Dan, which is where the Bible calls the northernmost part, to Beersheba at the south. It's only about 150 miles, which is quite small. Similar sort of distance, if you know the UK very well, if you were to drive from London to Nottingham. It's about a 2-hour drive. That's the whole size of Israel. So it's very, very small. And again, I just love that God chose this such, you know, tiny, insignificant in many ways place to be the area, you know, at a time where there was no internet or phones, to be the place and time where his son, who will change the world, comes. I'm sure many of you who know your geography will know that Israel is bordered by Lebanon in the north, and of course that features in the Old Testament a fair amount, Syria and Jordan in the east, and Egypt in the south. And of course we have the Mediterranean Sea on the coast. And I'll just show you again a Mediterranean Sea off there. Yeah, because it's such a sort of small land, and I'm going to slow the flight down again now because we are getting a little bit closer to Jericho. Yeah, because it's sort of such a variety of land, you can, you know, I don't want to sound like a travel agent here, but you can go scuba diving, you can go skiing, sometimes in the same season, because of just the sheer variety of land that is going on. There are also really quite strong concentrations of salt water. Now, of course, I'm talking about the Dead Sea, which is in front of us. This is in Israel, there are sort of two main bodies of water, and I'll just show you the map again so you can see. We have the Sea of Galilee up here, which we've circled around, and then we have down here the Dead Sea. Now, I've never been to I've never been anywhere near any of this, but I know that the Dead Sea has a legendary reputation for being very painful if you ever go in it. Why? Because the concentration of salt is so high that if you have any cuts or abrasions on your skin, you're going to know about it as soon as you go in there. Secondly, because of the high salt content, if you go and lay in the water, you will feel more buoyant than you feel in perhaps conventional water because of the salt content. And actually, just looking ahead of us, so we're coming up to Jericho, and Jericho, if you sort of look about 1 o'clock of the plane, so sort of look roughly in between where the sun is and the Dead Sea is. Jericho is there, and we're coming up to it. But when the people of Israel were coming up from, because I always thought, you know, why did they need to cross the River Jordan? Well, if you look, they've come up on the left-hand side. Okay, so you see we got this the Dead Sea in the middle, and then on the left-hand side is where the people of Israel would have come up from their wandering in the wilderness. And of course, if you imagine the Jordan River, which is down to our left, is winding all the way down, connecting the Sea of Galilee to the Dead Sea. And so, you know, that the river forms a natural barrier from anybody wanting to cross from the left side there, which is the eastern side, to the western side. And of course the Lord, as we said, dried up the banks. So we are slowly approaching Jericho now, so I'll just speed it up a tiny bit while we draw closer to Jericho. And let's think about this. So Jericho is believed by many to be one of the oldest inhabited cities in the world. Do you know that archaeologists have unearthed more than 20 successive settlements in Jericho over thousands of years? It's described in the Bible as a city of palm trees as early as Deuteronomy chapter 34 verse 3, and even today there are abundant palm trees. So Jericho is right in front of us, this city mass on the ground. So let me just show you a photo of what Jericho looks like today. So there you go. Yeah, not, you know, you're not going to see lots of skyscrapers as you would in other cities, but you know, this city has the history and the character which many other cities in the world do not have. It's very close to the Dead Sea, as you see. It's that's just to our left, and interestingly, you sort of see that this area, the road from Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is, and we're going to be going there, but Jerusalem sort of, if you were to draw a line straight in front of the plane right now, so you see the direction the plane is pointing, Jerusalem sort of in that direction. And so, you know, in Jesus' story of the Good Samaritan, you've got the Good Samaritan going down to Jericho from Jerusalem. Now you might say, well, why was he going down? Because again, if you look at the map, Jerusalem and Jericho are sort of, you know, next to each other. Let me just show you again. You have Jerusalem here and Jericho here. So how could Jesus say a man was going down to Jericho from Jerusalem? Well, of course, what Jesus and really talking about, and in the same way, actually, I'll just show you. The Bible describes Jesus and his parents going down from Jerusalem here to live in Nazareth. Again, that's not going down, that's going up. Well, what are we talking here? Jerusalem is far higher sea level than any of these places, and so for you to go to any of these places, it would be described as going down. And so this road, if you look on the right hand side, you know, quite rocky mountains. I remember when I was traveling through sort of mountains like this in Afghanistan, narrow valleys, you know, people would be very prey to attacks by bandits or terrorists, and so Jesus, you know, could quite easily paint the picture of this the story of the Good Samaritan, this man going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and getting jumped by bandits on the way. Just gonna have a quick drink to help the old vocal cords. Now, what's fascinating is that many people who come to Jericho nowadays, of course, sort of expect to see ruins of walls or something. You know, we've all heard the story of Joshua and how the Lord God told them to march around the city and then shout, and then it fell down. But of course, these walls are long gone. But what's fascinating is that there is archaeological evidence of these walls. And what archaeologists have noted from the ruins they found of the walls is that these walls have fallen inwards. Okay, so these walls have not fallen outwards, haven't been not pulled outwards. These walls have all fallen. They've all collapsed. Sorry, I think I made a slight mistake. Not inwards. I got my words mixed up. They collapsed outwards. Okay, which is a very rare thing to happen. What archaeologists have also found around Jericho is that the city was raided, but without anything being plundered. So it was attacked, it was burnt, but things weren't plundered. For example, jars full of grain could still be found. Now, what conqueror in ancient days would defeat a city and not plunder it? Of course they would plunder it. But what do we see in the Bible? Joshua and his men were told, do not take anything from the city. Everything is an offering, if you like, to the Lord. And of course we know the story of Achan, who disobeyed that and took some things for himself and ended up paying for it with his life. So again, I think it's fascinating when you actually look at the archaeological support for the Bible and historical support. There is so much wonderful things that we can see here. So we've finished with Jericho. We're just going to sort of do one more pass by it on the right hand side, and then we're going to be heading, and I'll just show you our sort of route map again. Here we go. So we're going to be heading sort of southwest, sort of next to the Dead Sea, and we're going to approach Bethlehem from the southeast down here. So you see that on the left hand side we have the Dead Sea again, and you again see that once you start to move away from the River Jordan, and notice how drier and more barren things get. So I'm just going to speed up our flight very slightly. I must admit, when I was recording this beforehand, you'll see that I start to refer to the map a little bit more here, because one of the drawbacks of this simulator, it has not got specific, small towns mentioned. It's got them from the satellite, but you need to have Google Maps open or something else to work out. So I'm constantly checking the map here, thinking, okay, at what stage from the Dead Sea do I need to turn right, essentially? Because you see that Bethlehem sort of lines up with this nub that comes outwards. So I was sort of thinking, right, once I get there, I need to turn right. So here we go, we've made the turn, and we are now heading towards Bethlehem. But before we go to Bethlehem, I just wanted to show you, I think this is another fascinating bit of history, and I only noticed this when I was doing the flyover, and I was like, oh, what's that? And I googled it, then found out it actually directly links to the story of Jesus as well. So we'll come up to it in just a second. But if you all remember the Christmas story, the king who was on the throne at the time was King Herod. Now, this guy was called Herod the Great. And Herod was a bit of an architect. He built two fairly notable things during his reign. And one of them, which we're going to see in a second, is called the Herodium. Now, what I'll do, actually, I'll show you the picture of it first, and then you can see it as we fly by, just so you can see it work. So this is a picture of the Herodium. Okay, so this is an artificial man-made hill, and on top of it you have a fort. Now, of course, a lot of that fort has now fallen down, but we can still see a lot of it. And here's a view from inside the Herodium. Now, I'll just go back to the video because you can see it now. I'm just going to pause the video here, and if you look, see this box I've got? If you look at the top left of the box, see where the top left of the box is touching now? Top of the hill there. So top left of the box, where the volume control is here, this is where the Herodium is. So if you just keep your eyes on that, that is where the Herodium is. So the Herodium, as I say, was built by King Herod, and he wanted, this fort that he could have. He had another fort as well, which is even more harder to attack. And it turned out Herod was actually buried there after he died. He had quite an unpleasant death, a sort of failed suicide attempt from what we can see from history, and he ended up being buried in this tomb. And the archaeologists that found his tomb actually died in the Herodium a short time afterwards because he slipped and fell. So Herod's tomb is actually closed to archaeologists for now until they were able to make the area a little bit more safe for him. Okay, so what we're doing now, we're swinging past, and for any Old Testament people that know the Old Testament, you know the place Tekoa. This is Tekoa, directly in front of the plane. You see that quite ordered, nice little area on top of a hill there. That is Tekoa. And if you Google that in the Old Testament, you'll see that it is referred to a few times. So now we're going to be swinging north to Bethlehem. Now, Bethlehem, and I think what's interesting, just so you can get an understanding of the geography here, Bethlehem is very, very close to Jerusalem. Let me just show you the map again. So you see Bethlehem is here, and Jerusalem is just up here. So it's about 10 kilometers away. And indeed, Jerusalem has expanded so much outwards, and Bethlehem, of course, is not a little town anymore. That they're pretty much touching in terms of the buildings spreading out. Now, Bethlehem translates to, or Bethlehem, which means house of bread, and it's located in the hill country of Judah. Now, of course, don't we know that hills are part of the nativity story, because, of course, we have shepherds nearby, and this is a photo taken from the shepherd fields overlooking Bethlehem. We have some shepherds looking their sheep there. So the shepherds in the nativity story would have been somewhere, of course, in the vicinity, and angels appeared to them and told them the good news. And again, I think that's such a wonderful thing that we have. And let me just pause the video here. You see where it says Temple Mount? That is where Jerusalem is. That's where the temple is. Look how close Bethlehem is to Judea. God could have sent angels to Jerusalem, to all the great and the good, the VIPs, and said, hey, the Messiah has come, go to Bethlehem and see him. But he didn't. He appeared to some lowly shepherds doing an incredibly menial job. It was a very low quality job, even in those days. And the angels told them that the Messiah has been born in Bethlehem. Isn't it wonderful how God, speaks to the little people? He graces the little people with his message. And we see that in 1 Corinthians, don't we? How Paul says that, not many were wise and great and good when God called them. So here we are flying over Bethlehem. Bethlehem was the place where Jacob's beloved in the Old Testament wife Rachel died and was buried. It was near where Ruth, in the book of Ruth, gleaned the fields and brought the grain back to Naomi. It was the home of Jesse, the father of David. So you see, this area again has got so much biblical history in it. There was even a well at Bethlehem where three of David's mighty men brought him water when he was hiding in the cave of Adullam. Now, Bethlehem was built up a little bit by Rehoboam, who was David's grandson and Solomon's son. It became a little bit more of a fortified city right there. And thinking about Jesus himself specifically, the Gospels of Matthew and Luke identify it as the birthplace of Jesus. Now, Bethlehem was actually destroyed by the Roman Emperor Hadrian when the Jews rebelled versus the Romans for the third time in about 130 AD. So that's just over a century after the Lord Jesus. But it was rebuilt a little bit afterwards, and in Bethlehem there was commissioned a church, the Church of the Nativity, and I think I can show you it here. It's on the right hand side there. I believe that is the Church of the Nativity. I hope I've got my pictures wrong now. I'm pretty sure that is the Church of the Nativity. So it's a very, very, very old church. Now on the left side here, you see that we've got a stone feeding trough here. You know that in the Gospel of Luke we hear that Jesus was placed in a manger. Now the conventional imagery of Jesus, being born would be, a rickety wooden stable, maybe some animals around. But actually, most people think that once they were refused a place in the inn, they would have gone to one of the caves on the outskirts of Bethlehem, where she would have given birth. We aren't sure exactly, but a lot of caves were used to keep animals in. Obviously, they would have had doors and stuff put in, and stone troughs like this one on the left are the sort of things you would have seen inside it. And so it's not entirely unreasonable to imagine, not so much a wooden stable, but more Jesus in a cave in a stone trough like this. Again, we don't know entirely, the gospel accounts don't give us specific details like that, but it's just worth flagging up. So let's continue with the flight. So we've done a circuit of Bethlehem, and now we are going to head towards the sort of last area of our tour, which is Jerusalem. And you see it, the Temple Mount again is marked in front of us there. So Jerusalem, actually, sorry, am I doing another circuit of Bethlehem there? I might just speed that up a little bit. So Jerusalem currently has 8.7 million people living in it. I think London has 25 million people living in it. So compared to London, it's nowhere near as big. But of course, Jerusalem is one of the most famous cities in the world. Of course, it is the crossroads, if you like, of three of the great monotheistic faiths. Now, when I say monotheistic, what does that mean? It means that you believe in one God. So, Jerusalem is sort of a key site for the Jews, of course, for the Christians, and for Islam as well. Now, the word Jerusalem first appears in the book of Joshua. And it was thought by ancient Jewish scholars to sort of be a combination of two names. So united by God. So Yireh, which means the abiding place, which was the name given by Abraham to the place where he planned to sacrifice his son. And it's worth noting, guys, where this Temple Mount is here, this is again in pretty much the place where Abraham went to sacrifice his son. Of course, God intervened and stopped it. But again, notice how all of this is just part of the same story. So Jerusalem is a combination of the name Yireh and Shalem, which means the place of peace. So Yireh, the abiding place, and Shalem, the place of peace. Okay, so combined together, it's Yireh Salem, so Jerusalem. So Jerusalem is a high plateau. It's surrounded by valleys on various sides, and so it's very hard to attack Jerusalem and to overcome it. To be fair, though, it has been taken 37 times in its history, and all of them but two were taken from the north, because the valleys in the south and the east and the west made it very hard. So here we see Jerusalem is far more built up and populated than some of the other regions we've seen. So we can do a little circuit around Jerusalem, and then we're going to hone in on the Temple Mount and the Mount of Olives. Of course, those are very key elements. So let me just show you, while we're circling Jerusalem, what Jerusalem actually looks like. And you see here we've got Temple Mount there. I think that's the mosque there on the right hand side, and just a little glimpse of what Jerusalem looks today. So I think again the simulation here is not perfect, but I think it's done a pretty good job of making it look good. So in Jerusalem, as you know, those that know the Old Testament, when Israelites captured the Promised Land, This city was occupied by a group called the Jebusites, and we see that in Judges 19. And when David became king in about 1,000 years BC, so 1,000 years before Jesus, he united the 12 tribes, and having conquered this area, he made it his capital. So Jerusalem really became a thing, and that's why it's called the City of David, under King David. And David, of course, brought the Ark of the Covenant here. Now, Jerusalem in Bible times was very, very small. And let me just show you a little comparison here. Okay, so here is the Google Maps image of Jerusalem right now. So you see it is massive. It extends all the way out here. But actually, Old Jerusalem, which is what it was like in biblical times, is just this very small area here. And I'm just going to zoom in on it so you can see. It's just this area in red. Okay, and within this area, and we're going to orbit it in a second, but just so you can get an idea, here is the temple. So here's where the temple would have been. Okay, here we have the Mount of Olives. So this is where Jesus would have prayed the night before, and he did other things at the Mount of Olives we'll see in a second. Here is where people think Golgotha or Calvary was. So here is where Jesus was crucified, because that was at that stage in the New Testament. That was still outside the wall. Let me show you a New Testament map. So here was the original walls. Okay, and you got the temple, you got Gethsemane right here, and here is where Golgotha, where Jesus was crucified, what apparently took place. Now, afterwards, there was a wall extended, which is the walls we see there now, by Herod Agrippa in 44 AD. So that wasn't too long after Jesus was crucified. But remember that Jesus went outside of the city to suffer and die. So you see, all of this history took place within this very, very small area here. So we're going to orbit around it in a second and give you a better glimpse of that. But Jerusalem, as you can see, has expanded out massively, of course, compared to then, as many cities have. As you can imagine, it's quite far from a natural water source. It's elevated, so it's not that you can channel water to flow down into it. So Jerusalem, of course, is heavily reliant on a massive network of aqueducts, waterways and tunnels beneath the city to keep it all going. Okay, so I think what we're going to be doing now, let's just see, I think we're going to be taking, hanging a right and going to Temple Mount. You see we're drawing a lot closer to Temple Mount right here. Yeah, I think that's the way. I can't remember if I did another loop round or not. And I think we're going to Temple Mount. Okay, so let's talk about Temple Mount. So again, this is a place that is steeped in biblical history. This is sort of like a solid 36-acre platform, and I just want to show you a photo of it because it is in a flight simulator, but it's I think a real photo is better. Okay, and you get a glimpse of some of the sort of the old walls here in this photo as well. So it was on this platform that King Solomon, because remember King Solomon, David had sort of planned and designed the temple, but the Lord said to him, you're a man of bloodshed, you can't be the one to build it. I want you to hand over the responsibility to your son, and he's going to build it. So David got all materials and things ready, and Solomon built it. So it was on this platform that Solomon built the temple. And this temple itself was destroyed in AD 70. Now, do you remember when Jesus is sitting in the temple and his disciples say, wow, like what wonderful stones they have here? And Jesus says, I tell you the truth, not one stone will be left standing on another stone. And people were slightly incredulous that he could say that, and yet it came true. It came true in AD 70. The temple was utterly destroyed. Of course, this has been this area, and you see we're sort of orbiting over it now. This has been a faithful symbol, if you like, of God's glory for 3,000 years. And as I say, Jews, Christians and Muslims hold this site to be precious. Now you might say, why do Muslims hold it precious? They don't believe in Jesus. Well, of course, as I say, this is where Abraham went to sacrifice his son. And of course, they believe in aspects of the Old Testament, and so they hold to that as well. And I think, isn't that interesting? And just to go slightly back here, as we're orbiting round, that roughly in this region, so on the right-hand wing of the plane, is where Abraham went to sacrifice his son. And then just in front of the plane here, so if you look at sort of where the plane is touching now, that's roughly where Jesus is said to have been crucified. And again, we don't know that for sure, but that's what historic tradition tells us. And again, I think there's such a beautiful picture in that, isn't it? That's so close. Where Abraham went to sacrifice his son carried the wood up the hill, remember? And God provided the ram. Well, several thousand years later, Jesus carried the wood up the hill, but there was no get-off for him. Jesus was the God's provision that we may be cleansed and forgiven from our sins. It's such a wonderful thing just to see God's artistry in this, how this story, it's all interlinked and how it all comes together. Solomon built this temple in about 1000 BC. To be clear, just to clarify earlier, the first temple that Solomon built was destroyed by the troops commanded by King Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonians. Then it was rebuilt, and the book of Nehemiah is all about the rebuilding of that. And then Herod, in the 1st century BC, expanded, refurbished this second temple, which had been rebuilt, and that's the one that Jesus said will be destroyed. Sorry, just to clarify. So yeah, it was in this temple location that Jesus taught and he ministered. This is where he drove out the money changers from what he had done. And again, he was later crucified a few hundred meters away. So it's amazing. And it was the Roman general Titus who came and flattened this temple in AD 70. I note in the chat we've got David Dwyer. David used to work for Microsoft, so David, your guys have done a good job here. This is a very good simulator. Okay, so as we look, if you look just past the Temple Mount here, you see that sort of hillside that's catching the sunlight, just where the label of Temple Mount is. That is the Mount of Olives. So you see how close all of this stuff is to each other. And again, just looking back at the old map of Jerusalem here, you've got the temple around here, and of course the Mount of Olives. So you've got the temple there and the Mount of Olives in Gethsemane here. So they are literally so close to each other. And this valley here, again, little one for the Old Testament lovers. We all should be Old Testament lovers, but for those who know their Old Testament well, this is the Valley of Kidron. Okay, so you see how it goes down from Temple Mount and then up to the Mount of Olives. This valley in the middle is called the Valley of Kidron. Okay, so Kidron Valley. So again, you'll recognise this in the Old Testament. Okay, so now I've orientated the camera around to the Mount of Olives. So now we can see, get a little look at what this was like. Right now, half of it is a cemetery, and here's a photo of it, a Jewish cemetery that, of course, lots of people have been buried in. Now, the Mount of Olives was... Jesus spent, it's frequently mentioned. It's on the route from Jerusalem to Bethany. Remember, in Bethany, I think that's where Mary and Martha and Lazarus, his dear friends, were. Bethany, again, is just outside Jerusalem. And so the route to Bethany, because Bethany's on the east of Jerusalem, would have gone past the Mount of Olives. So Jesus, would have been very familiar with the Mount of Olives. It's the place where he wept over Jerusalem. You can imagine, actually, we've got a perfect vantage point here. You can imagine standing on the Mount of Olives, looking over Jerusalem. Remember, Jerusalem was a lot smaller. It was sort of that little cluster around where the Temple Mount is right now, you see. And Jesus wept over it, saying, how I wish to gather you as a hen gathers its chicks under its wings, but you were not willing. Again, I think that's a challenge for so many of us there. Jesus, he did some teaching on the Mount. He did some prophecy to the apostles here, telling them that they will suffer tribulation and persecution before the ultimate triumph, going to the kingdom of God. And often after his teaching in Jerusalem, again, you can imagine, after a busy day in Jerusalem in the temples, you would just cross over the Kidron Valley and you could go and rest in the Mount of Olives. And let me just show you a photo of what the actual olive part of it looks like today. So here's a little picture. Again, it's quite nicely done up now with the little pathways and stuff. But you can imagine maybe what it would have been like that night. When Jesus was there and he'd asked his inner circle of disciples to watch and pray with him, and they didn't. They fell asleep, and he was alone, surrounded by these olive trees, with blood coming out of the pores in his skin as he cried out, to God, Father, if you're willing, take this cup from me, but nevertheless, not what I will, what you will. He wasn't willing to put his own will and his own comfort and his own safety and well-being above his Father's will. And again, I think that's such a challenge for us Christians in this era of comfort and safety that we live in, where people's happiness and security is the number one thing that anyone ever really thinks about. Well, as Christians, we're called to put God's will above our wills. Now, at like we've seen at the various other places in this area, on top of the Mount of Olives, there is a Catholic church built called the Basilica of Agony, and there are some images in there of the Lord Jesus, praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. And so, yeah, that pretty much brings us to the end of the tour. I hope this has been useful to sort of get a bit of a glimpse about how these things factor in. But what I'd like to do is just finish with two things. First, I'd just like to finish with a quote that, again, massive shout out to Mum. Mum was so helpful in getting some of these facts down for me to go on. But I'd just like to read out this quote about what Jesus, as he was, going through this agony in the Mount of Olives, knowing that the next day he would cross the Kidron Valley, he would be put on trial, he would be executed, again, not too far away. But let me just read this out. He would face the most appalling suffering and death, with separation from his Father, to bear the penalty for sin of all sinners. Or would he look for an alternative, an escape, back to the Judean wilderness? Of course he did not. He went and met the arresting party, only to be led back into Jerusalem and to the cross. There he would be crushed in every way, as are the olives crushed from those trees to make oil. Now, because of what he did, rising, overcoming sin, overcoming death, can we be saved. It will only be our Prince of Peace, whose birth and coming into our sin-cursed world, the Prince that we remember at Christmas, is the one who can save us. And I thought I'd just finish with this verse from 1 Peter 2:16. We've seen a little bit of a slice of history tonight, and I hope this tour has been useful for you at just understanding sort of how these areas fit in with each other and relate to each other. And I might do an Old Testament one, I don't know, at some point in 2021. But notice what Peter says here. For we did not follow cleverly devised stories when we told you about the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ in power, but we were eyewitnesses of his majesty. My friends, Jesus Christ is not a myth, he's not a legend, he is the Word who became flesh. He walked this world, he was rained on, he was hungry, he was tired, he knows what it's like to be a human, and we've seen some of the sites that he frequented. This unknown, anonymous carpenter a few thousand years ago has changed the world because he is God, he is the Word who has become flesh. And so if you're watching tonight and you maybe don't know much about Jesus, guys, I encourage you, get hold of a Bible, or you can find one online, and just commit in this Christmas time, especially if you're in the UK and locked down, you've really got no excuse. Sit and read one of the Gospels. I recommend maybe starting with the Gospel of Luke, because that has a really quite comprehensive nativity story, and hey, it is Christmas in a couple of days. But sit down, read these Gospels, and ask Jesus, speak to me. If you're there and you're alive, and I know he is, he will speak to you, and just watch what he does in your life if you draw near to him. And so, guys, thank you so much. It's been really good. I was really nervous about this, that it would watch. We've had a lot of people. This is the most we've ever had watching a stream on our church. So thank you so much to everybody who has tuned in. It's been so lovely. And yeah, I'm really grateful that it was useful for you. It's looking at the comments, I think people are enjoying it. So thank you so much. And again, I might do an Old Testament one next year. But guys, God bless you. Merry Christmas. For those who do attend our church, we're going to be doing a short Christmas service, half an hour long, at 10 o'clock on Christmas morning. So I look forward to seeing you guys there. But much love. Merry Christmas. And I hope you have a blessed 2021 in which you grow closer and closer to our Saviour, the Lord Jesus, the Word become flesh. Thank you so much, guys. Much love. See you soon.